There was a time when she used to reach for you first. A text in the middle of the day. A hand finding yours without thinking about it. Come here. That didn't need an invitation from you to happen. And somewhere along the way, that stopped. Now you're the one initiating everything. The conversations, the affection, the plans. While she's become quiet, passive, waiting rather than reaching. You've probably tried harder in response, showing up more, asking more, hoping that more effort from you would eventually draw more effort from her. If that's where you've been, I want you to know something before we go any further. What actually tends to bring someone back to initiating again usually isn't more pursuit from you. It's a specific, patient sequence, one that often takes longer than anyone wants it to, but that tends to work in a way that simply trying harder rarely does, no matter how much genuine love is behind the effort. I've talked with a lot of people in exactly your position, the one still reaching, watching their spouse become someone who only responds instead of someone who initiates. I want to be honest with you before we go any further, because I think you deserve that more than you deserve a comforting oversimplification. I'm not going to tell you 60 days is a guarantee, or that this works identically for every couple. It doesn't. What I am going to do is walk you through the sequence that tends to actually matter, across roughly 2 months, for the spouses who do eventually start reaching back out on their own. Not because there's a script that manufactures desire, but because there's a real, learnable pattern to how safety gets rebuilt enough for someone to start initiating again, even when it feels like nothing you've tried so far has made any difference. When someone's spouse has stopped initiating, there are really only a handful of ways people tend to respond. The first is pursuing harder. More texts, more questions, more visible effort, hoping increased pursuit will eventually produce increased reciprocity. The second is giving up and going cold in response, matching her withdrawal with your own, either out of hurt or exhaustion. And the third is a deliberate, paced sequence, reducing pressure first, rebuilding safety through consistency second, and allowing genuine reciprocity to return on its own timeline third. I'm not going to tell you which path you've been on. I can't know that from here. But I do want to walk you through what that third sequence actually looks like across roughly 60 days, because it's the one most people never try. Usually because it requires patience that feels counterintuitive when what you actually want is for things to change right now, not in 8 weeks. The first 20 days are about reducing pressure, not increasing it. If you've been the only one initiating for a while, there's a good chance your pursuit, however well-intentioned, has started to feel like pressure to her, something she has to respond to, rather than something she gets to choose. During this phase, the goal is to remain warm and present without chasing, giving her actual room to notice her own desire to reach out, rather than continuing to fill every space where that desire might otherwise develop. In the short term, this can feel deeply uncomfortable. Pulling back your pursuit when you're desperate for things to change can feel like giving up. But the long-term consequence of continuing to pursue harder is that it tends to reinforce her passivity rather than interrupt it, because there's simply never any space where reaching out first becomes necessary or even possible. There's a specific dynamic worth understanding here. When one person consistently fills all the space in a relationship, initiating every conversation, every plan, every moment of affection, the other person, even unconsciously, tends to settle into the role of responder rather than initiator, simply because there's never a gap left for them to fill instead. Reducing your own initiation isn't withdrawal. It's deliberately leaving room for a different dynamic to have any chance of forming. This doesn't mean going cold or distant. That's a different mistake entirely, one that tends to produce more withdrawal rather than less. It means staying genuinely warm in low-pressure ways, a kind good morning, a normal conversation about your day, while consciously not manufacturing extra opportunities for her to respond to your initiation. The distinction is subtle but important, present and warm, without constantly initiating and waiting for her response. This balance is genuinely hard to hold, especially in the early days of this phase, when the temptation to check whether it's working can pull you right back into the old pattern of pursuit. Trust that reducing pressure is itself the work of this phase, even when it doesn't produce any visible change yet. The absence of pressure needs time to actually register before it can start doing anything. The next 20 days are about rebuilding safety through consistency. Once the pressure has genuinely eased, this phase is about proving, through repeated small moments, that you're not going to swing back into intense pursuit the moment she shows the smallest sign of engagement. In the short term, this consistency can feel unrewarded. You might not see much change yet, which can be discouraging after weeks of deliberate restraint. But the long-term consequence of abandoning this consistency too early, the moment you see a small positive sign, is that it can confirm her earlier suspicion that any warmth from her will immediately be met with overwhelming pursuit again, which tends to push her right back into caution. Consistency during this phase means something specific. Showing up the same warm, unpressured way on the good days and the discouraging ones alike, rather than letting your own hope or frustration visibly fluctuate based on how she's responding that particular day. Spouses who are cautiously testing renewed trust tend to notice inconsistency quickly, and inconsistency here, warm one day, visibly disappointed and withdrawn the next, can undo weeks of careful, patient groundwork. During this phase, small signs of her testing the water, a slightly longer conversation, a moment of unprompted affection, are genuinely significant, even if they don't yet look like the full reconnection you're hoping for. Responding to these small signs warmly, but without escalating pressure in return, tends to matter enormously here. Meeting a small reach with an overwhelming response can inadvertently teach her that reaching out invites more intensity than she was actually ready for, which paradoxically discourages the very behavior you're hoping to see more of. The right response to a small reach during this phase is proportional warmth, noticing it, appreciating it genuinely, but resisting the urge to treat it as a breakthrough that changes everything overnight. A steady, calm response to small signs of reconnection tends to encourage more of the same, whereas an intense, relieved reaction, however understandable, can accidentally signal that the stakes are still too high for her to reach out casually and comfortably. The final 20 days are usually where genuine reciprocity starts to return, if the previous two phases have actually done their work. This is where she starts reaching out first, not because she's been pursued into it, but because enough safety has been rebuilt that initiating no longer feels risky or unnecessary. In the short term, this phase can still feel fragile. A single, overwhelmed response from you to her renewed initiation can set things back. So continuing the same warm, non-overwhelming presence from the earlier phases still matters here. But the long-term consequence of navigating this phase well is a kind of reciprocity that feels genuinely mutual, rather than one person pursuing and the other simply tolerating it, which is usually what you were actually hoping to rebuild in the first place. It's worth noting that even genuine reciprocity, once it starts returning, tends to be inconsistent at first, rather than fully restored all at once. She might reach out one day and go quiet again the next, testing whether the new pattern actually holds under different circumstances before trusting it fully. Continuing the same steady, non-overwhelming presence through this testing, rather than treating any single quiet day as a setback, tends to be exactly what this final phase is asking of you. It's worth naming that this 60-day sequence rarely moves in a perfectly straight line. There may be good weeks and discouraging ones, moments that feel like real progress, followed by a return to more distance. That unevenness is normal, not a sign that the sequence has failed. What matters more than a perfectly smooth trajectory is the general direction across the full stretch of time, not any single week's fluctuation. Across all three phases, there's something worth naming that applies broadly. Everything you do during this process carries a short-term consequence and a long-term one. Continuing to pursue harder feels proactive in the short term and tends to entrench passivity in the long term. Going cold feels protective in the short term and tends to deepen the distance in the long term. And moving through this deliberate sequence, reducing pressure, building consistency, allowing genuine reciprocity to return, takes real patience across real time, but tends to be what actually produces someone who initiates because she wants to, not because she's being pursued into it. I know, watching your spouse stop reaching for you is genuinely painful. And only you know how long you've actually been carrying that particular ache. I can't know that from here, and I wouldn't presume to. But if you want something that walks you through this more deeply, a way to actually work through this sequence with more structure and specificity for your situation, I put together 3 step-by-step guides for every stage of a marriage crisis, including exactly this kind of moment, the Complete Marriage Rescue Trilogy. It's linked in the first comment below, whenever you're ready to look at it. Now, let's keep going. Here's the part I really want you to sit with before we finish today. Genuine reciprocity can't be pursued into existence. It can only be given room to return, once enough safety has actually been rebuilt underneath it. The urge to pursue harder when things feel distant is completely understandable. But it's usually the instinct working directly against the outcome you're actually hoping for. I'm not here to tell you exactly how your specific 60 days should unfold. That's something only you can actually navigate, based on your own marriage. Nobody outside it, including me, gets to script that exact timeline for you. But if you do want support thinking this through, a clear way to adapt this sequence to your specific situation, that's exactly what the Complete Marriage Rescue Trilogy was built for. It's not a lecture telling you to just be patient and hope, and it's not a script for the exact words to use tonight. It's 3 guides that walk you through the process itself, one piece at a time, at whatever pace genuinely fits your situation, without turning even the patience itself into another form of pressure aimed at her. It's linked in the first comment below. Take your time with it. Go look at it when you're actually ready. There's no rush on my end, and there shouldn't be on yours either. Before you go, I want to leave you with this. Wanting your spouse to reach for you the way she used to isn't unreasonable, and the ache of watching her stop doing that is real and worth taking seriously. But there's a real difference between pursuing that outcome and creating the conditions where it can actually return on its own, and only one of those two tends to genuinely work. There isn't a universal guarantee for how this unfolds, and I'd be lying if I told you there was one. What's right is going to depend on your history, your spouse, and how much genuine patience you're actually able to sustain across a process longer than any single conversation could produce. If any part of what I talked about today felt like exactly your situation, I'd genuinely like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments how long it's been since she reached for you first, and whether pursuing harder has actually helped or made things worse, even if that's a hard pattern to admit to yourself. Not to be judged, and not to be told exactly what to do by strangers on the internet. Just to be heard by other people carrying this exact same quiet ache. Wherever you are in this tonight, the reciprocity you're hoping for is more likely to return through patience than through pursuit, even though patience is, without question, the harder thing to offer.